Good morning, space science fans. A quick disclaimer to save myself from grief. I'm going to say some things that are not very complimentary about the current state of NASA, about some of their representatives, their current leadership, and some of the decisions that the administration has made recently that I think has put NASA into a very grim state that was quite evident during this particular rollout. It was cringeworthy in the extreme, and I'm not going to be very kind to some of these folks. So in any event, if you're the kind of person that feels that the current NASA administration can do no wrong, or the people who are running it can do no wrong, or the current administration too can do no wrong, keep in mind that I was no fan of the previous administration either, nor was I a fan of Administrator Nelson. But let me tell you something. Nelson was an absolute genius compared to the leadership that I saw yesterday. So if you're going to get annoyed about things like this, then I recommend you click off now. But otherwise, please, I value every single viewer, and I hope you continue watching. Here we go. Good morning, space science enthusiasts, and welcome to another special bulletin here on the Angry Astronaut. Yeah, these news items just keep rolling off one after another. I'm sure most of you have heard about this one, but you may not know just how significant this particular announcement is. And it's very, very easy to overlook the significance of it when you see just how cringeworthy this announcement was to begin with.
On the phone, we have Katie Stack Morgan, the Perseverance Project scientist. Very exciting. As well as we have our new associate administrator, who, if you have any questions, you will ask questions of him as well. Amit, who I'm grateful he's accepted the post as the top lead career employee. I formerly worked at on the mission for Artemis, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But for today's press conference, for the last 30 years, NASA has been exploring Mars. And in that exploration, we're looking for signs of life, we're looking for water, but 30 years of exploration. And in the past, we thought we found signs of life. And when we did that, we put it out to the scientific community. And the scientific community would come back and say, well, listen, there's different explanations for what you think was life. It actually was created by something else.
Now, Transportation Secretary Duffy, who was just kind of shoved into this role when they decided to not give Jared Isaacman the job for NASA administrator, I think because he made some donations to Democrats in the past or something like that. Can't have that. So in any event, this guy's been jammed into this extremely important role at NASA, a role for which maybe he's qualified, I don't know, but nobody is qualified to handle the job of Transportation Secretary and NASA Administrator simultaneously, and that was very clear at the beginning of this announcement. But what was even more clear and more incredibly cringeworthy was the behavior of Nikki Fox, Associate Administrator, who tried to roll out this announcement with one of the most scientifically inaccurate things I've ever heard said on television.
And NASA science is undisputably the global authority in the search for life beyond our home planet. Our galaxy is 100 billion light years across.
Say what?
Our galaxy is 100 billion light years across.
Say what? Stop it! Listen! 100 billion light years? That's bigger than the extent of the entire known universe. Now, granted, there's 100 billion stars in the galaxy, so I imagine that's probably what she was maybe talking about. I still can't imagine making a mistake like that and not realizing what you've done and then correcting yourself instead of just spewing this ridiculously inaccurate figure at the American public, many of whom probably don't know the actual answer to that question. By the way, the Milky Way galaxy is 100,000 light years across, again, containing roughly 100 billion stars, maybe a little bit more than that. A fact that I was aware of when I was 12 years old. old and a big fan of Carl Sagan and the TV show Cosmos. I would have been screaming at the television set when I was a little kid, let alone today. But in any event, it could be that she's just nervous that she's going to lose her job because they might find out about some internship work that she did for Democrats or something in the past. Seriously, I really apologize to people who are big supporters of the Trump administration. There's certainly some good things that this administration does. I wasn't a big fan of the Biden administration at all, but these folks are so trigger happy when it comes to people that they perceive as being not in alignment, as they say, on a regular basis. Anybody that they perceive as maybe being a little bit disloyal. Jared Isaacman, of course, being the most significant example, a guy who really should have gotten the job for NASA administrator, a guy who definitely had huge bipartisan support. But anyway, all that having been said, after that huge mistake was made, then Nikki Fox went on to say this.
So last July, as Secretary Duffy eloquently described,
on Mars. And so a year ago, we thought we found what we believe to be signs of microbial life.
Eloquently described.
Cringe. At what point was Administrator Duffy speaking eloquently here? I literally couldn't pick out a second of his speech where he was being eloquent. Hell, I'm not being eloquent right now either, but at least I'll admit it. I can't believe that she actually said that. I mean, is she really trying that hard to keep her job? Is she really that concerned that she's going to be perceived as being out of alignment if she doesn't come over all obsequious? It was just a tough thing to go through. Fortunately, thank God, the people actually responsible for the discovery, the authors of the paper that recently came out about this discovery, they were fortunately able to present their data far more effectively. And actually, I think they did a really good job. And here's the big news. Once we got past all the cringe moments in the introduction, but the big news is NASA has found almost indisputable evidence for life on Mars. Plain and simple. This was essentially a sales pitch for a sample return mission to Mars, something that the administration was planning on canceling, but now they're making the case to send a sample return mission to the Red Planet and bring it back so they can actually confirm the existence of past life on Mars while Trump is still president. And I think that that would be a huge feather in his cap. So hopefully we'll get that sample return mission. But then again, to be very clear, the evidence that NASA has now uncovered is very close to indisputable proof that life existed on Mars. There are no abiotic processes that could have created what they found in an ancient river valley that emptied into what is today called Jezero Crater. The abiotic processes that could have made these phenomena take place in the rocks that were examined and all of the analysis that was done on these rocks, these so-called leopard spots and other things that I'm going to be talking about later on in the video. The abiotic processes that could have created these things did not exist in this region of Mars as far as we know. Extreme heat, for example, could have created the phenomena that we're looking at, and there was no volcanic activity, no evidence of large-scale lava flows in this area. Instead, the only evidence of what existed there billions of years ago is water, mud, an ancient river valley, an ancient lake, and no subsequent lava flows or volcanic activity that could explain all of this. When it comes right down to it, what NASA has found is very compelling evidence for the existence of life on Mars. And if life existed back then, it probably exists today as well, which is something that we've always known since 1976. A few billion years ago, roughly at the same time as single-celled organisms were evolving here on Earth, there was an ancient river valley on Mars called Neretva Vallis, or at least that's what we call it today. That water is, of course, dried up, and now the Perseverance rover is exploring this region. And the reason that NASA steered Perseverance into this region of the Jezero crater is because this is exactly the type of region where we would expect to find the beginnings of life. Ancient life in the beginnings of its evolution. It includes water, mud, organic compounds, and energy. All of the necessary components for the beginnings of life. Of course, we weren't sure about the organics, and we weren't even really sure about the water being in existence for a considerable amount of time. You don't just need liquid water, you need liquid water in motion over organic compounds, a lot of chemical reactions, in other words, taking place in that water in order for life to start to evolve. But if life were to exist on Mars at any time in its ancient past, this would be the most likely place to look. And sure enough, last year, NASA came across a rock formation known as Bright Angel within the northern margin of Neretva Vallis. And within that formation, one particular rock came to be of great interest to researchers. That rock is known as Chiava Falls. Not too long ago, when Chiava Falls was first presented to the public, it made headlines around the world because scientists were openly fawning over the specimen's peculiar dotty features that resembled poppy seeds and leopard spots. The latter, which are millimeter-sized blobs, tiny little things, are each surrounded by black rings that scientists determined to contain iron and phosphate after studying them with Perseverance's toolkit. Both substances can result from chemical processes on Earth that are driven by microbes. David Flannery, an astrobiologist and member of the Perseverance science team from the Queensland University of Technology in Australia, said, quote, "These spots are a big surprise. On Earth, these types of features are rocks often associated with the fossilized record of microbes living in the subsurface. What we saw in this rock were these layers of very fine-grained, rusty red mudstone that had in them these incredible features. These textural features told us that something really interesting had happened in these rocks. Some set of chemical reactions occurred at the time they were being deposited." But chemical reactions, when there's a lot of water present, is not an unusual thing. How do we know that these chemical reactions were involving microbial life? Well, the first thing they did was look for evidence of organic compounds in the mud by implementing a spectroscopic search of the stone that was being examined using what's called the Sherlock instrument on the Perseverance toolkit. And in the process of the spectroscopic analysis, they found very clear indicators for organic molecules being present, not only in this rock, but from several rocks that were sampled throughout the region. Very few other alternatives besides the presence of organic molecules. Then they overlaid the presence of these organic molecules with water and mud to see whether or not all of these components were involved in these chemical reactions. In other words, were all of these substances present in these leopard spots and other features in the rock? And sure enough, they were. So not only do these leopard spots and other features resemble the types of things we see in fossilized records of microbial life here on Earth, that is to say, the excretions of microbial life after they devour enzymes and nutrients. Well, in addition to that, there was clear evidence that these reactions, that these spots had come into existence as the result of chemical interactions between water and organic molecules. And there is no other way to interpret that than biology in action, unless there's some kind of bizarre process on the Martian surface that we simply don't understand that's producing these results. But the simplest solution, rather the simplest explanation for all of this, if we want to go ahead and use Occam's razor for a change in favor of life, is that this is a biological process that created these leopard spots. The only potential explanation aside from a biological one that could have produced these features is the presence of extreme heat. As I mentioned before, a lot of volcanism, a lot of volcanic activity. And even though there was a lot of volcanic activity on the Martian surface in other regions of the planet, especially in the Tharsis region where all the really big volcanoes are, there is zero evidence for any kind of lava flows, any kind of extreme volcanic activity in this region, either before or after the development of these spots, that would explain their existence. Really, when it comes right down to it, the simplest explanation, and really the only explanation, is the presence of active microbial life. But what does this mean about current life? Does it possible that this could have survived over all this time in spite of the massive climatological changes and other fundamental changes that have taken place on the red planet? Well, almost certainly yes. Based on everything we know about life here on Earth, once life is present, life finds a way, to quote Jurassic Park. And that is absolutely true, especially if that life has millions of years to adapt to new conditions. And Mars did not go through some sort of cataclysmic change that suddenly turned it from a habitable world into the radiation-blasted world with a very thin atmosphere that we are familiar with today. It took tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of years for Mars to transform from a very habitable world to the world that we are familiar with today. And in that time, life almost certainly could have adapted to the new conditions. Certainly, most life would have gone extinct, but not all of it. There are many extremophile bacteria on Earth today that could survive if we transplanted them to Mars tomorrow, which is one of the reasons why cross-contamination is such a significant concern for most planetologists. All of that being the case, though, what about the discoveries that were made back in 1976? I suggested that this is something that we've known for a very long time. Well, if life existed in the past, and if it most probably exists today as well, then most probably the label release experiment back in 1976, created by Dr. Gilbert Levin and included on this mission in spite of Gilbert Levin's relative lack of experience with NASA compared to some of his colleagues, well, most probably that experiment produced positive results because there is active life on the Martian surface. The label release experiment introduced nutrients into the Martian regolith, which microbes tend to really enjoy, especially primitive microbes that were likely similar to the types of microbes that existed on our planet hundreds of millions of years ago. The microbes would eat the nutrients and produce carbon dioxide as a byproduct. And what happened in every case with the experiment is that the nutrients were consumed and CO2 was the result, exactly as anticipated. To make absolutely certain, they blasted the samples with extreme heat, enough heat to kill any bacteria that were present in the Martian regolith, and the results came back negative, as expected. Kill all the microbes, and nothing is there to eat the nutrients anymore. But just to be extra sure, they blasted the samples with a lesser degree of heat, enough to kill perhaps half or 60% of the microbes, but not all of them, and tested again. And as expected, a smaller portion of nutrients were consumed and a smaller portion of CO2 showed up. By the way, this is a method used to test drinking water for harmful bacteria today. It's a method that's been proven over and over again over a period of many decades, and it's never produced a false positive result. Now, on top of all of this, NASA still thought that the presence of radiation might somehow be producing these results. So the Viking lander flipped over a rock that would have shielded any regolith underneath it for millions of years from the effects of radiation and tested again. And sure enough, the test came out positive. And they didn't just come out positive on Viking 1, they came out positive on Viking 2 as well. And yet, in spite of all of this, NASA still called the results inconclusive. They thought that maybe perchlorates, which are present in Martian regolith, although we found out about that a little bit later on, but perchlorates might also consume the nutrients in the same manner and produce CO2 as a byproduct. However, in spite of all of the attempts that have been made using perchlorates to reproduce these results in the laboratory, nothing has ever worked. Nobody has ever been able to disprove the label release experiment in spite of decades of trying, and yet NASA still does not regard the label release experiment as being valid at all. And in my opinion, probably because Dr. Gilbert Levin was not one of them. He wasn't a respected member of the NASA community. He was a newcomer, and how dare he be the first person to discover life on another planet. And sadly, because Nobel Prizes are not given out posthumously, Dr. Gilbert Levin and his colleague Dr. Patricia Strott will probably never be recognized for the discovery they made almost 50 years ago, Administrator Duffy, almost 50 years ago in 1976. So once again, as always, I am so disgusted, so frustrated that Dr. Gilbert Levin and his experiments in 76 weren't even mentioned in this presentation. They're definitely not going to be mentioned at all in subsequent research, subsequent announcements. Instead, the impression is going to be given that NASA's just been digging and digging for evidence over all these decades. They didn't really find anything all that compelling until recently. But these geniuses today who did the NASA job the way they're supposed to, that is to say, don't make any bold declarations until we tell you that it's okay to do that, these are the people who are going to be credited with discovering life on Mars, not Dr. Gilbert Levin, whose ingenious experiment detected active life on Mars back in 1976. What should be happening right now is at least some mention of the label release experiment and its findings. And let's say that they were inconclusive. Okay, let's go ahead and make that assertion, even though no abiotic process that was ever experimented with was determined to have created the sorts of results that the label release experiment created. Never, ever was it shown that an abiotic process could have actually done that. Only the process of living organisms could have created the results in the label release experiment that were actually discovered. But regardless, they could say that they were inconclusive then, and ever since we've been working hard to try to confirm it. And now we've made a huge step forward. We're so close to confirming what Gilbert Levin asserted, that he had found life in 1976, that there are active biological processes going on Mars right now. And at the very least, we have very strong evidence to indicate that life existed in Mars' ancient past. And based on what we know about life and how resilient life is, if life existed back then, it probably still exists today. So we just need that final confirmation in order to honor Dr. Levin's discovery all those years ago. Something along those lines, but I guarantee you NASA isn't going to mention Gil Levin at all. And that is an atrocity of epic proportions. But even more significantly, in my opinion, is another telling fact from all of this. These results, or rather these phenomena in the rocks that Perseverance uncovered, seem to have taken place roughly at the same time that simple life was evolving on Earth. And what that seems to indicate, that if you have similar conditions, similar temperature, similar organic molecules, the presence of liquid water, just a few basic elements in the same place at the same time under similar conditions, you're going to get life over and over again. That the existence of at least single-celled life is not that special of a thing. It's something that is a very natural process that we are probably going to find throughout the solar system. Wherever there's liquid water and organic molecules, places like Titan, beneath the surface of Titan that is, places like Enceladus and other regions of the solar system, we are also going to find life. And perhaps that's the biggest thing that many people have never wanted to admit. Because when we find that life is an ordinary thing, when life is something that comes about naturally under certain circumstances regardless, it suggests that the life that exists here on Earth is not quite so special after all. That if we extinguish ourselves in some sort of cataclysm, it's not going to be that big of a tragedy for the universe, because surely some other kind of sophisticated civilization will arise someplace else if life comes into being this easily. And that is the kind of philosophy we dare not have at such a crucial time in our history. Don't know, but regardless, I think that this is an amazing discovery, a groundbreaking moment in the history of astrobiology. I look forward to hearing what they have coming next, although I have a feeling the only thing they can have next is a sample return mission from Mars, and in my opinion, they absolutely need to deliver those samples to the Lunar Gateway. They don't need to be bringing that stuff here to Earth. We have no idea how virulent or dangerous a bacterial or viral infection might be if it evolved on a completely different planet. We need to be extremely cautious with a sample return mission. The best way to do that is to deliver it to a space station orbiting the moon and not even orbiting our planet. But we'll see if that ends up happening. That was one of the purposes for the Lunar Gateway, so let's see if NASA actually follows through on that. I will keep all of you up to date. Thanks again for watching. Please consider supporting this channel on Patreon. That's the only way that I can travel abroad to find new and unique content for you folks, like Australia, for example. If you'd like to support me in that way, all the details are in the description. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, stay angry about space.